Running an ad, you're partnering with trusted voices like Steve Bannon, Charlie Kirk, and other influential hosts. Backed by millions of monthly listeners.
What's happening? Because of a real voice, man. I watch it all the time.
Real America's Voice rocks.
Real America's Voice gives sponsors the chance to put their product front and center, displayed on screen and highlighted by our anchors during exclusive segments and live events.
Head to freetrumpknife.com.
This means your brand becomes part of the conversation as it happens.
Secure your spot before it's too late.
Join us today and make your brand part of the news conversation that America's viewers trust. Real America's Voice, where your message is seen, heard, and remembered.
Just ahead on American Sunrise, Dr. Fauci faces the Senate. What will he reveal? And will lawmakers finally get the answers they've been demanding? We'll have coverage throughout the show. Plus, the Senate confirms Jay Clayton as the nation's newest intelligence chief. What changes could be coming to America's spy agencies? We'll have the latest. Also later is the 2028 Republican race already taking shape. New polling shows Vice President J.D. Vance holding a commanding lead over Marco Rubio, for example. But what else does the poll tell us? We'll have those stories, so much more as American Sunrise starts right now.
Good morning, America.
Welcome to American Sunrise.
Whether it's culture,
We have breaking news to share with you.
politics, President Trump is joining us live now from Florida. We've got you covered. This is what it looks like to be a patriot.
We have to protect the American family.
The American dream is still alive.
I'm David Brody.
I'm Terrance.
And I'm Dr. Gina.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Dr. G. We are live with you from the Palm Beaches. Let's bring in Allison Hans, who is here with me in the Palm Beaches. Terrance and David. Let's see. David Brody has, I think he said he has jury duty, Allison. But
yes.
here's my guess. I'm just, get me a tinfoil hat. But here's what I think. I think because he lives in D.C. I think he went to the funeral yesterday and he's still grieving. I think that's where David Brody really is.
Well, okay, I'm right there with you with the tinfoil hat, but that's a stretch.
I don't think, I cannot fathom how he could get picked for jury duty.
I was really shocked by that.
I know.
You know what it is? David is so combative that he probably really ticked the judge off. That's my guess.
And the judge thought he won it off, and you
Any opinion that you have, sir? Would you be able to evaluate it just based on its face? Yes, sir, I think so. Okay, sir, I'd like to consider you for the jury pool. And I was like, really? I'm doing everything I can to get out of this case. I'm doing everything I can to get out. And, he still kept me in the pool. Fortunately, I wasn't chosen.
there you go. Yeah, though enjoyed the fame. We know that, Allison.
Oh, this is going to be fireworks. What I am hoping for today is that the senators do not get all wonky on us, okay? Because we don't need blah, 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 all this, junk questions. We need some zingers here, like Kennedy style, because this joker, what he did to the American public for years, and now we're seeing it all in the diaries, is just, it's unbelievable. And he has to be held accountable. I mean, I have nothing else to say.
Yeah, I mean, he really is the face of evil. And when you look back at the lives lost and the family still devastated over things that he did, basically to polish his own brass. It's sickening. It's beyond disgusting. And we don't like to start off shows on a negative thing in the morning, you know, a negative note in the morning. But with Fauci, I don't know how you pull any punches.
Yeah.
He's literally the personification of evil.
You know what? There was a couple of years ago, I went to, this was random. I went to a Bitcoin conference. It was like a cryptocurrency conference. And I went to cover, it was a show about women in cryptocurrency. So I was there doing interviews and covering everything. And at the time, it was during, I guess, maybe when things opened up after COVID. And I saw Dr. Malone walk in. And I'm like, why is Dr. Malone, who wrote a book about COVID and knew Anthony Fauci for decades. He was one of the people who also created the mRNA technology. So he walks in. I don't know what he's doing at this crypto conference, but I see him and I'm like, I must interview him. And I ran over and we sat down for 45 minutes. I was like, this is not going in the show, but I just need to talk to this man. And I'll never forget at the time, this is 4 years ago, he said, because he knew Anthony Fauci very well, and he said, Anthony Fauci has no soul.
Wow.
And I was like,
no soul.
No soul. This is a man who's known him for decades, worked on the mRNA technology with him, and I was just blown away by that statement. It has never left me, and I will be thinking about that today when he is testifying.
Yeah, that's one of those things I don't think I can unhear, Allison. I think that's probably a good analysis of Fauci. Let's check out today's Bible verse. By the way, he doesn't deserve the title doctor. When you become a physician, you take the Hippocratic Oath, and he's allegedly killed millions of people. So I'm not going to call him Dr. Fauci anymore in the show today. Producers, scratch that out. All right, today's Bible verse was sent to us by Truth Prevails 387 in our YouTube chat. If you're not in our YouTube chat, please join us in there. We have a blast. We talk mostly, honestly, about food, but a lot about faith and a lot about freedom. Psalm 118, verse 8, it is better to trust in the Lord than to put confidence in man. Oh, boy. We're feeling that now in our political system, aren't we? All right, let's bring in Florida Congressman Randy Fine. Good morning, Congressman. What's your take on the Fauci thing? I mean, what we really want to know, what we all really want to know, Congressman, is this man going to see any consequences from his behavior?
Well, I think, thanks for having me. I think the real consequence that he's going to see is I think he will be viewed as a historically evil figure. And I think as someone who clearly loved the fame and loved how he was viewed and fawned over himself in those diaries, going down in the history books as one of the most evil people of the last 100 years, I think is a true punishment. I think about my oldest son, who I just sent off to college, who basically missed middle school because of ridiculous fake rules that said you couldn't be closer than 6 feet together, or you had to wear masks, or it wasn't safe to go to school. At the same time, it was apparently safe to have Black Lives Matters protests. Yeah. And I think of the damage. Certainly there's the people who died, but I think of the people who died alone. I think of the kids who had their educations irrevocably hurt because of these horrible policies, and this guy just wants to celebrate himself. Will he go to jail? I don't know. We have Joe Biden to thank for that and the auto pen pardon, but I think he will definitely be remembered in the annals of someone like Mao Zedong for that level of evil that he inflicted on the American and the people of the world.
And, you know, something that I also like to think about and or consider, Fauci is the face of this, but who else was involved? Who else knew what was happening? I think that there's a spider web that can move out there. And that also, we need to take a look at that. And hopefully today will be the beginning of that as well.
Well, I think that's a great point, because Fauci's, to me, real sin was, I think, that he took things that he believed, but he wasn't sure about, and then he made them absolutes. So he was like, I think taking this vaccine is probably a good idea. And then he made and said things like, if you take this vaccine, you can't catch COVID, which was a factual lie. He said, well, I think masks will be a good idea. And then it was, well, if you don't wear a mask, you're a bad person. He took theories and he made them factual, but then he wouldn't let them get in the way of his political views. You could have Black Lives Matter protests, you could burn down cities, but you couldn't go to the funeral of your mom or your dad. I think the other villain here, though, is the left, that was willing to use these policies to control our freedom. And they haven't forgotten that. And I think part of what we need to take away from today is the same people who wanted you to call your neighbor if they went outside, they wish to have power in this country again, and they will do it again. It's why they can never be allowed to take power, and why the election in November is just so important.
And also the media. We cannot forget, especially these huge tech companies who took people's Instagram down, Twitter down, because they were telling the truth. That is so egregious and disgusting.
Yeah, well, some of them are still doing it. Congressman, audios of Joe Biden's conversations with his ghostwriter now made public. The recordings appear to capture him discussing sensitive information, acknowledging he had classified material. Take a look.
And then next thing I have here is this is classified. It's all of it. It goes to the 17th.
I mean, this is what we were saying all along, and we were called conspiracy theorists for it. You know, you see this, Congressman, you see, things that were discussed, and we were all called crazy, like about Fauci and the vaccines and all the rest. We were all called conspiracy theorists for that. We were all called conspiracy theorists when, especially, and I never even wore this tinfoil hat, but the Pizzagate thing, which appears to be true after seeing the Epstein files. When are we going to learn that conspiracy theorists are pretty much people who have facts before they've been proven out?
Well, I think what we're really learning is the left just gaslights us. You know, they selectively pick and choose the problems that they have. And I think there's really no better example than the video you're showing on your screen right now. It was clear that Joe Biden was mentally incapacitated as president for the entire time. And it just got worse as it went along. He didn't know where he was. He couldn't string two words together. And yet when we pointed that out, we were accused of making deep fakes. Also, looking at these claims about classified information, they went after President Trump and tried to put him in jail over that. But when Joe Biden actually does it, no one seems to care. And again, it is that difference in view. It is that you can't have a funeral, but you can have a Black Lives Matters protest. It's that Joe Biden can do whatever he wants with classified information, but God forbid Donald Trump do anything. It is these things that make the left so evil, and the fact that they are willing to brainwash us in the way that they try to do every day.
And brainwash is the word, because that's what they did to so many people in the American public. And I just hope that today we get some answers, we get some clear answers, and people can start waking up. We know there are a lot of people in our audience who've been awake a very long time, but there are people still walking around who think Anthony Fauci is still a hero. That's crazy. That's absolutely nuts. But that's where we're at.
Yeah, tell that to the kids who are starting college this year, who missed middle school, and whose test scores are worse, whose math scores are worse, whose reading scores are worse, because they missed 2 years of school because of some belief in fake science that turned out to be false. And what made it even worse, honestly, is to go back to that for a second. In Florida, we reopened our schools very quickly, and we proved it was safe. Yet people like Fauci, despite the real facts, encouraged schools to stay closed. I mean, it was historic evil that we saw. And frankly, I just hope the Senate today humiliates the heck out of the guy so the American people can see him for the evil man that he is.
Yeah, I want to see him go to prison. And I also want to say, I love to blame the left for everything, but there's a big old uniparty that went right along with a lot of this stuff. Congressman, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
Coming up, we're going to check out the hottest headlines from the RAV newsroom with Allison Hans. Also later, President Trump hosts Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Ukrainian President Zelenskyy at the White House. Can you imagine the traffic? Did the high-stakes talks move either war closer to an end? Well, the latest is ahead on American Sunrise.
Okay, good morning, Tracy. How are you?
Hey, good morning. I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Good, good.
Good morning, Tracy.
Hi, Dr. Gina. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. It's the girls' show today. The gals' show.
It is. I started to say
love
Women
it.
Wednesday. I'm like, that's just so bad, though. I can't do that.
You're like, on Wednesdays, we wear pink.
I see a super chat from Colin Christie.
I love it.
Colin, thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Big spender. Love it. Get this chat flying. Let's grow. Let's go. Come on.
Allison, were you a cheerleader too?
Oh, no.
You sound like us right now, like a cheerleader.
No.
I know, right?
I was
like you'd fit right in.
I was a theater nerd.
Oh, I did that too.
Yeah.
Did you do theater, Tracy?
You know what? I didn't. That's where, you know, when you asked me to use my Southern accent, I was like, you don't want me to try. I don't have those skills.
Brody was listening. He's like, I can confirm I did not go to Lindsey Graham's funeral yesterday and grieve.
This news break is brought to you by AMAC, Association of Mature American Citizens.
All right, welcome back to American Sunrise. We still have a lot more to come on this show, including Fauci, not calling him doctor, testifying before the Senate. But first, Allison Hond is standing by with the latest headlines from the Real America's Voice newsroom, sponsored, of course, by AMAC.
Our country is under attack. The radical left woke agenda is infiltrating our schools, our houses of worship, our government, and our media. The younger generation needs you, the older, wiser generation, to and fight today.
Make America great again.
In headlines this morning, the Senate has confirmed Jay Clayton as Director of National Intelligence in a 51-47 party line vote. The former SEC chairman and U.S. attorney will oversee the 18 agencies and organizations that make up the U.S. intelligence community. Clayton says he will prioritize stronger coordination and communication while ensuring policymakers receive timely, objective, and independent intelligence. He has also emphasized the office's oversight role, saying the DNI should coordinate and direct intelligence priorities without exercising direct operational control over covert actions. CBS News' 60 Minutes is adding several new correspondents and contributors ahead of its 59th season. New York Times columnist Ross Duhat will join the program as a correspondent, while author and documentarian Sebastian Junger, journalist Gianna Tabani, and British broadcaster Trevor Phillips will serve as contributors. Former CBS Evening News anchor Norah O'Donnell, who previously served as a contributing correspondent, will also take on an expanded role as a correspondent. The additions follow a major shakeup at CBS News under editor-in-chief Barry Weiss. Longtime correspondent Scott Pelley was fired one day after a reportedly tense confrontation with new executive producer Nick Bilton during a staff meeting. CBS News executives say they are excited to welcome the program's new additions. The Trump administration is stepping up immigration enforcement at airports across the country. According to multiple reports, plainclothes ICE agents have detained foreign nationals at airports in several states, including some accused of overstaying their visas while immigration applications remain pending. The reports say the operations have been aided by passenger information shared between the TSA and ICE. The Department of Homeland Security has declined to confirm an increase in airport arrests or disclose the locations of its officers. However, the agency says people in the country illegally should not expect to fly domestically unless they are leaving the United States to self-deport. Now let's get our forecast with Weather Nation meteorologist Tracy Anthony. Tracy, good morning to you.
Hey, good morning, Allison. You know, we've been talking about flooding across the Northeast since yesterday. Want to show some scenes of what it looked like. We're talking rainfall rates of 1 to 2 inches per hour. This is going to continue to be a big problem here over the course of the next day. Look at this, Maryland. We had a hometown forecast from Maryland yesterday, and look at these storms that rolled through Tuesday afternoon and evening. So a lot of severe weather reports were issued yesterday, with wind damage being one of the big concerns. And as we start off the morning, that is kind of the focal point across the country, the big story, as we still have some flash flood warnings in place around Albany. The flood watches here will be in effect through the second half of the day today. Now I want to show you one other spot where flooding could be a big concern. Areas like Colorado, where we've had the burn-scarred regions. As they get that monsoonal moisture, flooding will cause some landslides, mudslides in these areas. So parts of Colorado under these flood watches as well throughout the remainder of the day today. You can see anywhere south of Denver, the flood watches are in place. Widespread heat alerts and heat advisories stretch from the southeast all the way to the northern border and then all the way across to the desert southwest. So, Allison, that's going to be kind of the other big story as we head into the weekend. It's going to be the record warmth out west once again. So, hey, we're right in the dog days of summer.
Okay, thank you, Tracy. Appreciate you.
Yep, and don't forget to drop your hometown forecasts in the social chats. I'll have those for you next hour.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Well, we are still standing by for Dr. Fauci's hearing in the Senate. Once it begins, we will bring you full live coverage. More on American Sunrise in 2 minutes. Good morning, Cliff.
Good morning.
I know. I'm listening. Whoop. Stop.
How you feeling?
Oh, I'm good.
Okay.
I'm good. I get adrenaline going and I'm all fine. Okay. Obey.
Okay. More than that? No. How's that?
He loves being in there. Nice look there at the World Trade Center. That's New York, New York, with the third best pizza in the country. St. Louis being first, Chicago being second, New York being third. This is really fun. There's no one here to argue with me. I love that so much. All right, welcome back to American Sunrise. The U.S. military says it intercepted an Iranian missile barrage targeting American forces, then joined Saudi Arabia in strikes against Iran-backed militia sites there in Iraq. According to U.S. Central Command, the strikes came after more than 30 drone attacks targeting U.S. troops and Saudi energy infrastructure. Saudi Arabia says it also shot down drones headed toward its oil facilities. The latest escalation comes as tensions with Iran remain high, even as the Trump administration continues to pursue diplomatic efforts. Let's now bring in the founder of Defense of Democracies, Cliff May. Cliff, you know, it just seems like this war isn't going away. It just seems like no matter what diplomacy President Trump tries, that Iran knows exactly what their leverage is, and they're going to exploit it infinitely.
Yes, they are. The regime in Iran wants to win this war. The regime does not want to compromise. It doesn't want to capitulate. It wants to humiliate the United States, and it's willing to take a lot of punishment. You shouldn't think it wouldn't. In January alone, it killed tens of thousands of its own citizens for the crime of peaceful protesting. It's hanging and executing people on a regular basis every day. It's been killing people in the country for 47 years. It's very important to understand what this regime represents. And I would say what their ideology is, except it's a theology. And it's a theology based on the writings and speeches and beliefs of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. He is the leader of the Islamic Revolution. Note, I don't say Iranian Revolution. And this is what the Islamic Revolutionary Guards, I don't say Iranian Revolutionary Guards, this is what they believe. This is what they're fighting for.
Cliff, real quick as a follow-up, I just want to ask you, you know, we're hearing a lot, and it seems to just be common deduction at this point now, that without something happening on the ground, right, this regime isn't changing, and this war won't end, it seems like, until this regime changes. So President Trump has said he's not sending in ground troops. That being the case, the only hope we have then is an uprising of the people. But it seems like we're far from that. We don't see signs of that. We're not. I'm hearing even politicians step away from that conclusion. What is the answer here?
Here's the answer is a little bit simpler than that, I would say. We need to, and we are, cut off all revenue to this regime. They need to go broke.
But they have money from other countries.
From what? They can't sell their oil. They have nothing else to sell. They're not selling cars. They're not selling TVs. They're not selling laptops. They have oil to sell. Almost all of it goes through Karg Island. You don't even have to take Karg Island. You just have to say to a ship coming up to Karg Island to load up, you know what? Turn around. If you don't, we'll disable you. Very easy for our military to do. Now, you strangle them economically. I think at the same time, you hit military targets. There's a lot of reports that we don't have enough interceptors. I think it's probably true. You don't need an interceptor against a missile that hasn't launched, that's been destroyed, where it's sitting, where it's stored. Some of the storage of those missiles are in what are called missile cities. What does that mean? It means heavily fortified underground tunnels. So if you can't do that, you block the entrance. Can they open the entrance? Yes, they can. But you can see the bulldozer, and they have no air defenses, so you can hit the bulldozer. So what you want to do is strangle it economically. You want to hit command and control. I would say you want to hit the airport, the communications mechanisms, the banks, a lot of other things like that. And those responsible for the murder of their own citizens, I would have them on my hit list as well. Make them either stay in a tunnel or let them look over their shoulder when they walk out into the street. Only if you have a crippled regime, no projection of power, can you get a collapsed regime, and then can the people take over. Right now, after you killed, say, 40,000 in January of these peaceful protesters, you have weakened the opposition and you have made people afraid to come out into the streets. So you have to weaken the regime, And a weak regime is much less of a threat to the U.S., and a weakened regime can be taken over by the people, but it may take some time. And I can give you examples of how long it takes for a weakened regime to fall. Say the 3 years or so between when the Soviets were in Afghanistan and when the Soviet Union fell, or Turkey after World War I before you got the Turkish Republic. These things don't happen necessarily overnight. Meanwhile, by the way, the CIA and maybe the Mossad can be, hopefully is, helping the dissidents, helping the opposition with weapons and organization. But that's a big job.
Okay, so Cliff, if we are not strangling them economically and we're not hitting these targets, why aren't we doing this? What's holding the president and or the military back from doing this?
We are strangling them economically, I would say. Even during this pause, we have a blockade of the ports. We are not letting them sell oil. It takes a little while to run out of money, is what I would say. He has a pause in hitting. I think, for whatever reasons, he believes he might be able to have a deal or a better negotiation with those who see that the regime is absolutely just running out of money. I have a column today in the Washington Times, and I say the way we should see it is the way a Hemingway character talked about how he went broke. He said the way he went broke was gradually, then suddenly. So strangle them economically, hit every means they have to project power. They have more missiles than we probably estimated. I think that's probably true. They protected them better. Here's what we should take away from that, very important. They've been building up and building up. If the president had ignored it, ignored the buildup of missiles, a missile shield, ignored the buildup of its nuclear program, probably within weeks at the end of the Biden administration, before the 12-day war. Now it's up to a couple of years. They would have reached what Marco Rubio's called the zone of immunity, and there'd be nothing we can do. Right now, we have made significant progress, but you got to build on that progress. It's not one and done.
One last thing, Cliff. If we're not going to send boots on the ground, what about the uranium? How are we going to get that back?
Here's what I'd say, and in the column today, I say everything I'm talking about does not require boots on the ground. You'd have to tell me what boots on the ground could actually accomplish. That's so good. That's so good. I'm not saying special forces can't have great missions. As for the HIU, the highly enriched uranium, we believe, could be wrong, but we believe that most of it is under rubble and has to be dug out. Again, you can see from the skies when it's being dug out. We, or the Israelis, can easily interfere with such a mission. The other thing that just to keep in mind is a place called Pickaxe Mountain. A lot of reports that they are trying to re-establish a nuclear weapons facility so deep that even massive ordnance penetrators can't reach it. Doesn't mean we can't find a way to destroy it. There could be HEU there that they moved. We don't necessarily know, but rubble is a good thing to encase HEU in it. And if they have no centrifuges that are spinning, they can't make that HEU into a weaponized form, put it on a warhead, put it on an intercontinental missile to deliver it to the U.S. I want to make one point that I think is really important. The president has said for years, this regime must not have nuclear weapons. He's not been quite as clear about why they must not have nuclear weapons. So I'll say it bluntly. If they have nuclear weapons and if they have intercontinental ballistic missiles to deliver them, they will use them. Do not think you can deter people who have the mentality of a suicide bomber. That's why they can't have it.
Cliff May, thank you so much for being with us. We're going to go now. Fauci hearing is about to start. He will be testifying before the Senate, and we believe that's going live right now.
Public health decisions. Frankly, the American people deserve an apology. I hope today Dr. Fauci will come clean, admit it was a mistake to fund dangerous research in China, admit that the risk of this dangerous research exceeded any possible benefits, ask forgiveness, and pledge to help our government devise safeguards so a man-made epidemic never happens again. Instead of an apology, you have for years avoided responsibility. Regarding the lockdowns, you argue that you did not personally issue every lockdown order, close every school, or impose every mandate. But officials across the country invoked your authority to justify these decisions. And you presented your recommendations not as judgments open to debate, but as dictates of science itself. Your own words demonstrate that you understood the influence you exercised. On March 14th, 2020, you wrote that the task force recommendations were driven by me, yourself, Deb, and CDC. The next day you wrote that you had convinced Mayor Bill de Blasio to close the New York City schools, so you were involved. That same night, Governor Gavin Newsom's chief of staff told you that the governor had decided to close California schools, bars, and restaurants after watching you on television. Presidents, governors, mayors, school boards, corporations, and Congress all bear responsibility for the decisions they made. The COVID lockdown, however, could never have been inflicted without you aiding and abetting the crime. Children lost years of education. Small businesses built over a lifetime disappeared. Patients delayed cancer screenings and other medical care. Families were separated from dying relatives. Workers were ordered to accept a medical procedure or lose their jobs. Worship assembly, employment, education, and travel were restricted in the name of science. While you did not impose every restriction, you used your public authority to justify them. While you concluded publicly that COVID occurred naturally, your private record tells a different story. In early 2020, your hand-picked virologist warned that the virus appeared to have been manipulated in the lab. In a conference call concerning the origin of the virus, all but two of the participants believed deliberate insertion was possible. Your concern was not merely theoretical. That same week, you led an urgent effort to determine whether your own agency had funded the research related to these experiments that were now under suspicion. Hours later, your assistant reported that the Wuhan experiments had indeed been reviewed and approved by the NIH. Those were not the actions of officials who believed that a research-related origin was an absurd conspiracy theory. They were the actions of officials urgently trying to determine whether their agency funding was connected to the research under discussion, connected to the pandemic. You could not hide that your agency had funded the Wuhan research or your long history of defending gain-of-function research. The only alternative left was to argue that COVID-19 did not originate in the Wuhan lab. You were not a detached observer. You had an institutional interest in the public believing that federally funded research had nothing to do with the pandemic. It was a conflict of interest from the very beginning. The authors of the proximal origin of SARS-CoV-2 privately had serious doubts about a natural origin. Within days, though, they flipped. And they all wrote in proximal origin that the virus was almost certainly not a laboratory construct. That paper was then used by the government and the media and you to discredit Americans who were asking the same questions that you and the authors were asking yourselves privately. You even cited proximal origin from the White House podium. You held it out as evidence that the virus could not have been engineered. But you didn't disclose your role in the discussions that preceded the writing of the paper. You did not disclose the author's original concerns. You did not reveal that you had been part of the paper, that you had read and offered editorial comments on the paper before it was published, before you began using it as evidence that it couldn't have originated in the lab. You did not disclose that you had immediately investigated yourself whether NIAID funding might be connected to the research. You did not tell the American people the full story. Duly released private messages indicate that the doubts with the authors and others didn't disappear after the publication. So while this was being waved at the White House to show that it couldn't come from the lab, the authors were still privately continuing to assign a meaningful probability to a laboratory origin, one thing in public and another in private. Some of the same scientists discussed avoiding email and carefully managing communications that might eventually be obtained under the Freedom of Information Act. The pattern is straightforward. Privately, there was alarm, then an immediate inquiry to see if NIAID's possible exposure to funding, then a rapid public declaration of certainty, continued private doubt, and then years of resistance to disclosure. The question is why? The only logical answer is that your primary concern was avoiding culpability. Your primary concern was hiding the fact that you had approved the funding for this dangerous research. Your support of gain-of-function research is extensive and long-standing. In 2011, your agency funded Ron Fauci's laboratory when it mutated the avian flu until it could spread through the air between mammals. This was the tipping point. This is when others became worried. You funded this. You advocated for this. The federal government's own biosecurity board, though, recommended withholding the details of these experiments because of the danger the research posed. People were concerned that publishing it was publishing a roadmap to creating bioweapons around the world. But you sided with the gain-of-function scientist Fauci and argued that the benefits of publishing the research far outweighed the risks. You defended this avian flu transmissibility experiments as critical research. You wrote that even if a scientist became infected and triggered a pandemic, the benefits of the gain-of-function experiments outweighed the risk. In 2014, your agency, NIAID, began funding the Wuhan bat coronavirus work. In 2015, Ralph Barrick and the Chinese scientist Shi Zhengli published NIAID-supported research combining a bat coronavirus spike protein with a SARS backbone. The resulting virus could infect human airway cells. It's a novel virus that now can infect human cells. It gained transmissibility. It gained function. In 2018, the same group of scientists, EcoHealth, Barrick, Shi, and their collaborators submitted the diffuse proposal, which involved the insertion of a furin cleavage site into the coronavirus. DARPA rejected it as too dangerous. When COVID was sequenced, though, early on in January of 2020, within days, scientists discovered that, lo and behold, it had a novel furin cleavage site, just as had been proposed in the diffuse project. This was either an extraordinary coincidence or a smoking gun, evidence that the Chinese had created COVID-19. It made the laboratory origin question more legitimate, and it made your categorical public denials indefensible. On May 11th, 2021, you told the Senate, the NIH has never, ever, and does not now fund gain-of-function research in Wuhan, in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. When I gave you the opportunity to correct the record, to reconsider the statement, you responded that you had never before lied to Congress. We were then told that only the government's narrowest regulation of definition counted here, that you could define gain of function in one way in which this wasn't gain of function, in which all of the common sense of the world would be thrown out, all of the idea that the mice were dying and the virus was more transmissible didn't matter because you had a technical definition that allowed you to fund it. But the real question is, was it dangerous? Was it a wise decision to fund this? And you haven't deviated from that. You've never admitted that it could have been a mistake funding this research in China. The American people weren't asking for a semantics debate over what is gain of function. They were asking, does common sense say this research was dangerous in Wuhan? They wanted to know whether their money-funded experiments in Wuhan that made bat coronaviruses better able to infect humans. The answer is yes. They wanted to know whether NIAID adequately supervised their work. The answer is no. When you defended this research, you described its benefits in the broadest terms. But when Congress demanded accountability, you hid behind the narrowest possible definition. You can't have it both ways. Your conduct concerning federal records raises further questions. It is a crime to destroy federal records. Yet our investigation reveals your assistant diligently reported that she deleted tons of emails. In 2024, you testified that you did not delete federal records. Who's telling the truth, you or your assistant? The committee has obtained repeated instructions from you telling federal officials to delete communications. On February 2nd, 2020, one day after Origin's call, you told Francis Collins, please delete this email after you read it. The committee asked for your voluntary cooperation to come today. Your appearance had to be compelled by subpoena. You're here today under duress. You're here today because of the court ordering it. President Biden issued you a sweeping pardon extending back to 2014, the same pardon he gave to his son Hunter. A pardon may protect a person from criminal prosecution, doesn't rewrite history. It does not erase documents. It does not convert a misleading statement into a truthful one. And it does not prevent Congress from establishing what happened. There will be another pandemic. There will be another crisis. And there will again be officials who insist that uncertainty must be hidden for the public's own good. They will demand obedience. They will invoke science. I am the science, as though it were a commandment. They will argue that government officials cannot be questioned because questioning them would undermine public trust. They have it backwards. It is secrecy that destroys trust. It is arrogance that destroys trust. It is censorship that destroys trust. And it is the refusal to admit error that destroys trust. That loss of trust may be your most damaging legacy. Trust can't be ordered. It has to be earned. No scientist is above scrutiny. No government official is beyond to treat the suffering of millions of Americans as a footnote to his preferred version of history. I now recognize Senator Peters for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee has a long and a very proud history of conducting serious oversight on behalf of the American people. When this committee has been at its best, Democrats and Republicans have worked together to investigate complicated issues, to follow the facts wherever they may lead, and produce recommendations that actually strengthen our nation's security and improve government functions. That bipartisan tradition has produced meaningful work following Hurricane Katrina, the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, failures at the Secret Service, and countless other matters. Unfortunately, today's hearing is the latest step in the chairman's sharp departure from that long tradition. This hearing appears to be a culmination of months of biased and selected efforts by the majority under the guise of a committee investigation to basically legitimize a predetermined conclusion that was reached years ago. In 2021, the chairman has called for today's witness to be fired, to be arrested, accused him of leading cover-ups and conspiracies. He has even featured the witness prominently in fundraising emails and on the cover of his book. He has also called for the cancellation of the witness's security detail, despite the fact the witness and his family have received numerous credible death threats. When I served as chairman, Senator Paul and I launched a bipartisan biosecurity investigation that included oversight of risky research and the origins of COVID-19, because we agreed that the committee's work would be stronger if we did it in a bipartisan manner and just followed the facts. That was and continues to be an area of legitimate and certainly needed oversight. As chairman, Senator Paul has taken the opposite approach. He has abandoned longstanding practice by blocking minority participation in committee oversight actions and has chosen to selectively release committee records that the minority has never had any access to in order to support his pre-drawn conclusions. The chairman has repeatedly excluded committee's minority and withheld documents and evidence from members that are entitled to receive them, disregarding longstanding Senate rules and committee precedent that have preserved the credibility of our oversight in this committee for decades. I have raised these concerns directly with the chairman because it's not just what we investigate that matters, but how we conduct that investigation. That also matters. One-sided investigations designed to validate predetermined conclusions do not serve the American people who sent us to actually uncover the truth and to solve problems. I wrote to the chairman requesting that he adhere to committee rules. But instead of addressing concerns that I raised, he removed part of the committee's website from the public view. This move not only prevented the public from being able to view those list of concerns, it adds serious questions about the desire for transparency and legitimate oversight of this matter. But what makes today's hearing particularly disappointing is not simply the chairman's actions, but what we could be using this committee's true and time oversight responsibilities to accomplish. This committee has not held its annual threats hearing at all in this Congress. We have not held a budget hearing for the Department of Homeland Security. There are important hearings that we would have the opportunity to discuss as to how to strengthen our Homeland Security across the board. No hearings on those topics. Instead of focusing on the national security challenges that we are facing in our country right now, today's hearing looks backwards, revisiting questions this committee has already examined, including through bipartisan work that Senator Paul and I conducted together when I served as chairman of this committee. But rather than building on that work to strengthen our preparedness against future disasters, we are instead relitigating the past. COVID-19 exposed serious deficiencies in our nation's public health infrastructure. We know that. More than 1 million Americans lost their lives, and this committee should absolutely continue to examine how we can better prepare our nation against future biological threats. Those are the kinds of forward-looking, life-saving questions that will help our nation be better prepared to protect the health and the safety of Americans when the next emergency occurs. Unfortunately, at this precise moment, we should be strengthening our capabilities. The Trump administration seems to be doing everything in their power to actually weaken our capabilities. The administration has hollowed out the public health workforce. They have fired, pushed out, and cut funding for public health personnel, shrinking the CDC workforce by a quarter. Thousands of experienced scientists have left government service, and with them has gone critical institutional knowledge that cannot be easily replaced, certainly not quickly replaced. The administration, thanks to political operatives like Russell Vought, has slashed or illegally withheld funding for life-saving medicines and cutting-edge technologies that let us rapidly develop them during an emergency. Mr. Vought is now further politicizing the federal grant-making process, proposing to subject all federal grants, including those for disaster relief, housing development, and cancer research, to the whims of political appointees, not nonpartisan experts. All of this has left the American people more vulnerable to infectious disease threats, and we are already tragically seeing the consequences. Staffing and funding cuts have slowed the federal, state, and local response to ongoing outbreak of a foodborne parasite, which has sickened thousands in my home state of Michigan, as well as across the country. At the same time, the administration cuts to global health programs and international partnerships have greatly reduced our ability to contain dangerous diseases like Ebola before they spread to our shores. We should be examining whether our federal health agencies have the personnel and the resources they need to effectively prevent, detect, and respond to these threats. We should be asking how to strengthen our biodefense efforts to deter our adversaries and prevent biological attacks against our country, and how our government can better coordinate and communicate during public health emergencies. These are the kinds of forward-looking matters that are worthy of this committee's time. Instead, we are here continuing the chairman's year-long focus on one individual. History tells us, unfortunately, another pandemic is all but inevitable. The question is whether Congress and this committee will work to better prepare our country for it, or continue looking backward while our public health infrastructure crumbles around us. That is the hearing that we should be having today. Unfortunately, I fear the intent of this hearing is only meant to further a purely partisan agenda and it will not make Americans safer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The accusation that the committee has denied access to the minority to records is categorically false. This is the most transparent investigation in the history of Congress. We actually created a website and we put all of the information on the website. It continues to operate. The reason it hasn't been accessed is no Democrat ever signed up for it. Not one Democrat. We told them the access. They never asked for the access code. They haven't been on the website because they have not cared about the investigation. It's a practice of this committee to swear in the witness. Dr. Fauci, please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you will give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God. Dr. Anthony Fauci, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Member Peters, members of the committee, I served at the NIH for over 54 years, 38 of those as director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Over that period, I proved that I believe in and respect the value of legitimate congressional oversight. In fact, I testified before and/or briefed Senate and House Senate and House committees well over 200 times over those 38 years. During and after the COVID pandemic, I have appeared multiple times for hearings in the Senate and the House, usually under oath, and sat for several days-long transcribed sworn interviews, answering questions about the very issues that are now the subject of this hearing. However, given Senator Paul's obvious obsession with calling for my prosecution, his repeated slanderous comments about me, and recently his publicly releasing my unredacted personal diary aimed at embarrassing and intimidating me, the only conclusion I can reach is that the sole reason he is calling me before this committee is to get me to say something, anything, that could vindicate his repeated public pledges that I end up, in his words, quote, behind bars, unquote. Any reasonable person who has followed his unhinged obsession with me would readily come to the same conclusion. Therefore, although it pains me to do so, because of the respect I have for the legislative branch of government and my decades-long record of cooperating with Congress, under the advice of my attorneys, I will invoke my right under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution to refrain from answering your questions. Thank you.
We will now begin a round of questioning. Dr. Fauci, your testimony today is compelled by a lawful subpoena. As you know, it's a crime under 18 U.S.C. Section 1001 to knowingly make a material false statement to Congress, with a penalty up to 5 years of imprisonment. Understanding that you are under oath, the American people would like to understand your reasoning, your rationale for why you chose to fund the research in Wuhan. There have been, intelligence agencies, the CIA, the FBI, the DOE, have all come to the conclusion that more likely than not, the virus came from the lab in Wuhan. And so we'd like to know, what was the rationale? What was the discussion? How, what went behind the decision to fund the research in Wuhan? How did you come to the conclusion that a totalitarian country would be capable of doing this in a BSL-2 lab, a lab that lacked the security? What was the reasoning? And are you sorry, basically, for making the decision? Would you, given another chance, say, well, gosh, circumstances now, as I know it, maybe it wasn't a wise thing. Can you explain to the committee why you chose to fund this dangerous research in China?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
In the red folder on your table is a copy of Section 192 of Title II of the U.S. Code. Your counsel has been provided a copy as well. That section makes it a crime for a witness appearing under subpoena to refuse to answer any questions pertinent to the question under inquiry. Do you have that in front of you?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
Let the record record that the Witness has refused to answer whether there's a folder in front of him based on his Fifth Amendment right. It is true that you're appearing under direction of our subpoena to provide testimony on matters under consideration by the committee, including the origins of COVID-19, risky life sciences research, and your tenure as a federal government employee. Additionally, you've been provided a full and unconditional pardon dated January 19th, 2025, for any offenses against the United States which may have been committed or taken part from January 1st, 2014 through the date of the pardon for a 10-year period, arising from or in any manner related to your service as director of the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases, as a member of the White House Coronavirus Task Force or the White House COVID-19 response team, or as chief medical advisor to the president. Have you refused this pardon, or do you have any reason to believe this full and unconditional pardon, this grant of immunity, would somehow require you to plead the Fifth Amendment?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
Based on the facts presented, I'm going to direct you to answer the questions. The committee has issued a valid subpoena. They have requested your presence here. The questions are very pertinent to your decision-making as head of NIAID, as well as a chief advisor to the president. Do you still refuse to answer the questions?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
Let's do the... Dr. Fauci, were you ever made aware of gain-of-function research on monkeypox being conducted at the National Biodefense Analysis and Countermeasure Center and back at Fort Detrick?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
Dr. Fauci, did the CIA ever transfer funds to NIH under an interagency agreement?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
I'm going to, but I need the long list of the gain-of-function questions. Dr. Fauci, did the NIH ever conduct research for or in coordination with any element of the intelligence community, CIA, ODNI?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
The reason why these questions are important is, President Trump has done a ban, and we're glad that he did a ban on gain-of-function research. So we're better off than we were when we had an advocate serving as head of NIAID, an advocate for gain-of-function research. There is still, though, a question, though, whether or not the intelligence community is adhering to that order. There's a question of whether or not gain-of-function research is still ongoing. And these are important questions the American people deserve to know. Dr. Fauci, have you been read into any classified Department of Homeland Security program, any prospective special access program concerning gain-of-function research?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
When we look at the research in China, the gain-of-function research that you've denied was gain-of-function. One of the things that startled the scientists when they saw COVID in the first couple of weeks was when they looked at the sequence of it, they said, oh my God, there's a furin cleavage site in it. And in this particular family of coronaviruses, the sarbecoviruses, they'd never seen this before. They were also startled to look at it and see how it was coded for, what the codons were, and to discover that the codons used out of 36 different possibilities turned out to be the one that was commonly used in gene manipulation by scientists. Dr. Fauci, were the scientists at the Wuhan Institute of Virology capable of inserting a furin cleavage site into a coronavirus?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
So one of the experiments that was pretty common was they would take the backbone of a SARS virus, and this would be a SARS virus that the backbone itself wasn't that dangerous, but then they would dig through guano, 300 feet underground, bat guano. They'd find other viruses, unknown viruses. They'd take the S protein off of an unknown virus and stick it on a backbone. And then they would infect mice that have humanized cells. And they were trying to discover if they could create a virus that infects humans. Now, many people would say, well, gosh, that doesn't sound like a really good idea to create viruses that don't exist in nature to see if they'll infect human cells. What if one escaped? What if you keep infecting this and do serial passage, you actually adapt the virus to be infectious to humans? So the question is whether or not Dr. Fauci, the Wuhan Institute of Virology, was combining an S protein with one virus with the backbone of others, and could this lead to a virus, maybe it wasn't even predicted, but could it lead to viruses that gained in function and then could lead to a pandemic?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
One of the arguments that you and others have made against this virus coming from the lab is it couldn't have come from the viruses that have been published. And nobody's really arguing that. I think from the very beginning, people acknowledged that the viruses that have been published are too far evolutionarily distant from a virus that could have become COVID-19. But what has never been acknowledged by the side who tries to call the other side of conspiracy theory, which is really something you don't usually see in a scientific debate. This is the first time I've ever seen an article printed in Lancet by your friends who called this a conspiracy theory. You know, these are the kind of things you see as a screed on a political, website. You don't really see this in science. But when they release this as being a conspiracy theory, we're wondering that when you do this, when you combine these viruses and are able to grow them in humanized cells, whether or not this kind of risky research, whether you call it gain of function or not, whether you use the definition of gain of function, whether this kind of research should have had more scrutiny. I think in your House testimony, you testified that you never traveled to China and that you were unaware that anybody at NIH ever examined the labs, that you trusted the Chinese scientists. I think you said that even recently, that with your discretion, you trusted the Chinese scientists. The problem is that even in our country, we trust our scientists. They're good American scientists, probably doing the right thing for America. But at the same time, we oversight to make sure it's not dangerous research, but we also investigate the lab. I believe Fort Detrick was one of our main labs, was closed down in the last year or two because of, research institute, a research incident that was dangerous with dangerous pathogens. And so the American people would want to know, how could you approve this dangerous research in China, say that you trusted the Chinese scientists, and then in the end, you had to admit that you'd never been there, and none of your inspectors had ever been there. Dr. Fauci, had any of the labs where this dangerous research was occurring, were any American lab oversight or lab investigators, did they ever appear in these labs to make sure that they were safe labs?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
So one of the main theories for those who have looked at this being created in the lab was the idea that could have come from a virus not previously published. Dr. Fauci, are you aware that Dr. Shi, who worked for the Wuhan Institute of Virology, was said to, and I think in her own words, to have over 100 viruses that had not been previously published that could have been a close enough relative to create COVID-19? Are you aware of that?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Under your testimony previously, when you denied ever having funded gain of function in China, it was so adamant as to be striking, to leave no room for any interpretation of what is or isn't gain of function research. But there's another important question. Did you fund gain of function research in other biolabs around the world?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
The one research project that we do know you did fund is the one that Ron Fouchier did. And it's important to talk about because this sort of was the beginning of the debate over gain of function. And this wasn't just me. I wasn't even aware of the debate 10 years ago. This was other scientists. Over 200 scientists at the Cambridge Working Group signed a protest because they didn't think you should fund the research, and they didn't think it should even be published because it was sort of a roadmap as to how to make a bioweapon. So what they did was the avian flu, and this is important. It may be the most important question we get to here today. The avian flu has about 50% mortality for humans. The good news, though, about animal viruses is they don't infect humans very well. It will infect humans, but doesn't go human to human very well. Ron Fouchier, with the money that you provided to him, did an experiment where he caused purposeful mutations to create a new virus, an avian flu that didn't just infect birds well, but actually infected mammals well, went ferret to ferret in an aerosolized manner. People saw this and were aghast, at the decision-making process that you decided to fund this. But this is when, the debate came about, and you wrote in support of this in the Washington Post, and you said, even if a scientist is bitten, even if a pandemic should occur, the knowledge is worth the risks. Do you still stand by that? Would you like to qualify at all whether or not the knowledge of gain of function is worth the risks, particularly in this case, since we now know 15 million people died worldwide? Many people believe this came from the lab. Do you think that the risks really are worth the benefits for gain of function research?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Yeah. All right. We're going to finish with this question, and it's based really on that statement, that general statement in your support for gain of function, the idea that the benefits outweigh the risks. So there are many other people who disagree, and they aren't politicians or not. I don't know what party they're in. David Relman is probably one of the most esteemed, and he is a scientist at Stanford. He, I think, has classified clearance. He's been a consultant to our government probably for a decade or more. And he's written about this publicly. He says the opposite. He said that the risks of this research do not outweigh the benefits. He said the risks, we shouldn't do it. Richard Ebright, who's been involved in this debate for 2 decades, says the same thing. Says we really shouldn't be doing this at all. There's a quote also by, the Kevin Esfelt quote, is that at the very end? Kevin Esfelt, who's a CRISPR scientist at MIT, also wrote about this gain of function. I implore every scientist, funder, and nation working in the field, please stop. No more trying to discover or make pandemic-capable viruses. No more experiments likely to disseminate blueprints for plagues. Dr. Fauci, would you like to at least answer this one question for us today and let us know whether or not you've changed your mind on whether or not the benefits of gain-of-function research outweigh the risks?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
The chairman has denied your assertion of privilege and directed you to answer, but you nonetheless refuse and stand on privilege despite the existence of the pardon. The committee will have to consider after this hearing what appropriate action should be taken against you for the failure to testify after being directed to do so. It's against the law to obstruct an investigation of Congress. There will be repercussions to your refusal to testify today. Senator Peters. You're not recognized. You're not recognized. If you are unruly, you will be removed from the proceeding. You are not recognized, and you are not recognized, sir. Sir, you are not recognized. You are not recognized. Security, we'll hold off. but you will respect these proceedings. You were told not to sit at the table. You insist on sitting at the table, and we told you you would not be recognized. You are not invited here for testimony, sir. You are being disruptive. Would you behave this way in a courtroom? No, because the judge would put you in jail. I can't do that today, but I can have you escorted from the premises. So I would say, sir, sit quietly and don't say another word. I said, sit quietly. You are not recognized. Another word and you're gone.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to hear what the attorney has to say.
He is not recognized by the committee or the chair. If he speaks again, he will be removed from the room. This testimony is from Anthony Fauci. This is not a game with his lawyers. He can advise, his lawyers can give him advice. He's got a half dozen here. They're all allowed to talk to him.
Yes.
All right?
Yeah.
But the attorneys are not recognized. In fact, the attorney was told not to sit at the table, and he's not obeying that recommendation. There's a row behind you, sir. That's where you were told to sit, and you're not. And now you're disrupting the proceedings. And so, look, this is the way Anthony Fauci wants to be remembered, for a lawyer not listening to the rules. That's the way you want to be remembered, and that's what you're going to do. You are not recognized, sir. Security, please remove him from the room.
I just go into your...
Let the record state that Dr. Fauci will still have the advice of the other half a dozen attorneys that he brought along today. Senator Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The COVID-19 pandemic is not the first or the last public health crisis to impact our nation. In December 2022, I released a report that identified significant failures in our federal government's preparedness and initial response to COVID-19. This report contained 17 key findings. It's a very large report, which I have right here. It contains 17 key findings and corresponding recommendations, including the need to invest in sustainable domestic manufacturing capabilities for critical medical supplies, build the infrastructure needed to surge testing capacity for infectious diseases, and robustly fund public health emergency preparedness and responses across all levels of government. Unfortunately, multiple administrations, including the current Trump administration, have failed to fund or to reform our health preparedness. This is something that I would hope the committee in the future would investigate. It needs to be taken a look at. It also feels like a new public health threat is hitting us every month. There's a foodborne parasite affecting thousands of people in Michigan and across the country, and our federal agencies still haven't fully pinned down the source of that outbreak. Measles cases in this country are at the highest they've been in 35 years. More children are getting sick and even hospitalized from this preventable disease. Over 1,000 people have died from the Ebola virus in Africa, and we don't know how widespread this crisis actually is. We have a hantavirus scare on a cruise ship, and though it hasn't made headlines in the way that the screwworm threatening our food security has, I remain concerned about bird flu that is also spreading and could one day cause a pandemic. This is also something this committee should be investigating and holding hearings on. Since January 2025, the Trump administration has taken a number of actions to drastically weaken our ability to fight infectious diseases and biological threats that endanger Americans. These actions are both incomprehensible and are also inexcusable. They include slashing funding for public health and infectious disease research, canceling contracts for cutting-edge vaccine technology, shutting agencies responsible for tackling infectious diseases around the world, firing thousands of federal employees with keeping our communities and our medicines and our food supply safe, and injecting political appointees in what should be non-political grant-making functions. That is something this committee should be looking at. I could go on. I could go on all the topics that we need to be looking at moving forward to protect this country. We're not doing that in this committee. That's what this committee was designed to do. It's what it has done throughout history. It has done it in a bipartisan way. We should get back to that and think about the future of this country and keeping this country safe. When a crisis like COVID-19 strikes, we have an obligation to examine what went right and what went wrong to provide accountability for the American people. Congress certainly has done that. Between the House and Senate, nearly 20 different committees, including this committee, as I mentioned, have conducted oversight of the COVID-19 pandemic, conducting transcribed interviews, holding dozens of hearings, and released more than 10 reports. Today's exercise, unfortunately, is a stark departure from those largely bipartisan, legitimate efforts. The chairman has shut the minority out of participating equally in these efforts, withheld information, selectively released documents, actions that completely undermine the credibility of this investigation. I will enter a record without objection, Mr. Chairman, a letter that I sent to you that detailed all of those areas that we have concern with and where we were shut out.
Without objection.
We'll provide other details as well. I think today's hearing, unfortunately, does real damage. It's tempting to turn one person into the scapegoat for a crisis that hundreds of officials across both the Trump and the Biden administration were responsible for handling. And it does so in a way that people that are facing death threats. This is only going to, unfortunately, deter other scientific experts from public service to understand that this is what they would have to go through as they provide their advice to us. We're not going to make our nation safer, and I hope that we can restore by doing these kinds of activities, and I hope that we can restore our legitimate bipartisan oversight that's going to help strengthen our public health and pandemic preparedness and other homeland priorities. That's what this committee needs to focus on. It hasn't the last year and a half. Let's hope it does in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Fauci, I hope the American people listen very carefully to Chairman Paul's opening statement. I think it's a stunning indictment of the actions you've taken that have been so destructive to global health. I certainly understand why you needed a pardon. I certainly understand why, on the advice of counsel, you're not answering any questions, because I think it'd be almost impossible for you to answer the questions truthfully without really demonstrating what you did, your culpability, self-incriminating. We have, all of us, has prepared a lot. I've been deluged with questions to ask Dr. Anthony Fauci. There are so many legitimate questions that deserve answers, and now you're not willing to provide those answers. So with my limited time, I'm going to talk about things that my investigation have revealed that have not been adequately answered and, quite honestly, haven't been adequately covered by the legacy media. I'll kind of combine the questions into kind of one, but you know, I certainly, let's put up the last COVID chart. I was warned pretty early on about the dangers of the experimental gene therapy that you've called a vaccine, but it really falls under the definition of gene therapy. So I was going to ask you, I mean, were you carefully monitoring the safety surveillance systems like VAERS and vSafe that literally were deluged with complaints? You know, currently, worldwide, there have been almost 1.7 million adverse events reported to the VAERS system. Of those, over 39,000 were deaths. And of those deaths, 24% occur on the day of vaccination within 1 or 2 days. 24%, which, by the way, just happens to be the same percentage that a Rasmussen poll pointed out the American public believe 24% of the American public believe they know somebody who died of the experimental gene therapy. So again, I was certainly interested in asking you whether or not you were following this as carefully as I was. It was not my responsibility to follow safety surveillance systems, but I did. And by the way, when I published, this is actual government information. When I published it and people had me on their shows, they would be censored by Facebook. They would be deplatformed. I think largely at the behest of the actions you took to make sure that disinformation wasn't spread. This wasn't disinformation. This was the truth. So I was going to ask you whether you knew Dr. Marks. I think you do know him. He's the head of CBER. He's the man who is in charge of approving vaccines and surveilling for the safety. My investigation shows that on March 1st of 2021, less than 3 months after the emergency use authorizations, he was warned by Dr. Anna Scharsman, data mining expert, that the algorithm they were using to analyze VAERS data was going to hide in mass safety signals. 26 days later and 3 months consecutively after that, they did data runs with a new algorithm that unmasked those safety signals. They showed dozens of safety signals, including sudden cardiac death, cerebral artery occlusion, basal ganglia stroke, agonal rhythm, Bell's palsy, and pulmonary infarction. Your diaries now show that you actually suffered pulmonary infarction in, I think, probably June 2021. I was just wondering whether it ever went through your mind that maybe that injection, all those boosters you took, might have caused that. And the question I was going to, and I'll ask this question, were you ever made aware of the fact that Peter Marks was warned that the algorithm was going to hide the safety signals? And were you told that senior FDA officials were given shown dozens of safety signals associated with the COVID injection?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Next area I want to go through is in that same month of March 2021, an employee at NIH, Dr. Nath, led a team of researchers who were diagnosing and treating individuals who'd never had COVID but were severely injured by the genetic therapy injections. Dr. Nath told those individuals, stay quiet. We want to make sure that we gather all the information and then release it to doctors so they can treat people like yourself. There was a concerted effort, and I'll enter this in the record. It appears inside NIH to quash Dr. Nath's publishing that study. It finally was put on a preprint server with telling no one, and I think about May of 2022. I think what's noteworthy about this is Dr. Nath told the injured participants that early treatment, early intervention was crucial for them to be treated. And yet within the NIH, they were questioning what was Dr. Nath doing. They didn't want to publish that because, and I want to take time searching for it, because publishing it would create vaccine hesitancy, which is what we continue to hear time and time again, is the reason they didn't promote they lied about the safety signals they were seeing. Throughout the pandemic, I always push early treatment. We've got things in here where you were really concerned about remdesivir because it was untested, but hydroxychloroquine, yeah, it was an approved drug. Maybe some safety issues, but we had a great deal of experience with it. All of a sudden, you have the Surgisphere study. It was retracted within 2 weeks because it was completely false. Totally blew up the use of hydroxychloroquine. And then when it comes to ivermectin, which, by the way, because I was contacted by so many people, I referred them to doctors that actually had the courage and compassion to treat vaccine-injured individuals. It works. But I was going to ask you whether you were involved in the FDA attack on ivermectin. You had a interview on CNN on August 29th of 2021, where, again, I just don't want to take time to find the exact quote, but you said there's no evidence that ivermectin is helpful. On that exact same day, and I've got the studies right here. There was a website that was tracking the random controlled studies. Here they are, showing 60, 70% efficacy of ivermectin. The same day you say there's no evidence, there was all kinds of evidence. Loved ones had to go to hospitals, had to sue hospitals. Just, would you try it? So I would want to know, to what extent were you involved in sabotaging hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, and did you do that because you knew the only way you get an emergency use authorization for these drugs, these experimental gene therapy, was if there was no effective treatment, you couldn't get the emergency use authorization. So is that why you helped sabotage these cheap generic drugs in favor of remdesivir, which, by the way, nurses, are you aware of the fact that nurses called it run, death is near?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
But let me end on this note, because this just came to light. We've got 11 million pages of documents. We also have other people who were in the room. But now we know you actually lied to your own diary. On March 27, 2020, you wrote in your diary, "To my surprise yesterday, the POTUS sent a letter to governors outlining a plan to reopen county by county while monitoring the spread of virus in the low-risk counties. This was half-baked and never shown to Deb or I before it was sent out." So we have evidence that, in fact, you were fully aware of it and certainly approved if not authored it. So I was just simply asking, is that true? Did you literally lie to your own diary? Did you know of that letter sent out to governors about reopening county by county? And again, Mr. Chairman, I'd ask you to ask the witness to just answer that one simple question.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hassan.
Thank you. Dr. Fauci, I want to start by thanking you for more than 50 years of service to this country at the National Institutes of Health. And it is unfortunate that you have been put in the position that you are in today. And it must be enormously frustrating to know that this hearing is designed to entrap you. It must be very frustrating for your attorneys to hear the chair's mischaracterization of the legal issues and posture that impact your decisions at the witness table today. Meanwhile, I was going to ask you a series of questions about things that are relevant right now to the people of the United States about the state of public health in this country. Since President Trump took office in 2025, more than 4,500 cases of measles have been reported. That is more cases in the year and a half since Donald Trump has been president than were reported from 2000 to 2024 combined. Children are dying because there has been increased vaccine hesitancy, fueled by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and frankly, his entire administration. Thousands of people in the United States of America have been sickened by a foodborne parasite, and the outbreak is nowhere near under control, as staffing at the FDA and other critical public health entities has been slashed by Russell Vought and Elon Musk. Last year, the National Institutes of Health awarded 201 fewer grants compared to the previous years. 207, I am corrected, compared to previous years. as those grants were either canceled or delays, especially at the beginning of the Trump administration, I can tell my colleagues what the impact was on people in New Hampshire, on scientists in New Hampshire, on clinical trials in New Hampshire, where people's cancer treatment was interrupted because Elon Musk and Russell Vought know better, they say, than the people at NIH about what to fund. And because they did some sort of word search, it seems, for some of the grants, and boy, oh boy, if you were studying rural health in New Hampshire and trying to understand how to better engage people who need health care in rural America, that was off the table. America is losing researchers and scientists to other countries because researchers and scientists, highly trained, highly qualified, invested in often by the American taxpayer, are finding the hostility from this administration so strong that it interferes with their science, and they want to pursue science wherever that science takes them. I also sit on the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. We have had a number of hearings with nominees recently to fill critical spots. One of those nominees is Dr. Erica Schwartz, a brilliant woman, medical degree, biomedical engineering degree. I think she also told us she has a law degree and a master's in public health. She was a 2-star admiral in the United States Navy, an experienced doctor. And yet, when I asked her if she would push back at Secretary Kennedy, if he instructed her to suspend the promotion of the flu vaccine as he did at some point in the last few months, there's an email to prove it, she couldn't answer that question. She either could not, would not, or had been bullied into evading a question about whether she, as the director of CDC, would stand up to Secretary Kennedy, the most unqualified Secretary of Health and Human Services this country has ever seen, and more than unqualified, somebody who pursues conspiracy theories, degrades people with disabilities, and continues to promote disproved science. That's the state of healthcare and public health in this country right now, not to mention the $1 trillion or so of cuts to the Medicaid program that is decimating healthcare in my state and decimating it around the country, not to mention the refusal of my colleagues and this administration to extend critical tax cuts for people who are trying to afford insurance on the Affordable Care Act. I just was at one of my community health clinics, and they are reporting fewer and fewer people coming in for care, disrupting care because they can no longer afford health insurance. And that is impacting, of course, the revenue stream to the community health clinic, their ability to hire and pay people, their ability to take care of their community. That's what I wish we were having hearings about in this committee and in the Health Committee. That's what I wish we were trying to address in a bipartisan way. But instead, we are here in an attempt to entrap you because you had a distinguished career trying to put Americans' public health first. With that, I yield.
Senator Lankford.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Dr. Fauci, thanks for coming today. I know you're invoking your Fifth Amendment right, which you have the right to be able to do constitutionally, but thanks for coming and be a part of this. There are a lot of issues and a lot of questions that have come up, and hopefully in some day in the future, we'll be able to get all this clarity to be able to pull together. There were over 1 million Americans that died from COVID. You know that well. You were tracking the numbers literally every single day. those affected and those that died from the earliest days. There are a lot of lessons that we've got to learn from this, that we should put into history to be able to determine what happens in the future. How do we respond in the future? How do we deal with something like this again? It was uncharted territory for everyone. But I would tell you, countless families, including my own, watched a loved one die behind glass or through a screen because we couldn't get access to them. Children couldn't get to school. People missed their prom or graduation ceremonies. There were lots of things that happened that dramatically changed the future of the country. The mental health issues that we have continued to deal with from the isolation have been profound. Even something as simple as children that wore masks or around adults wearing masks for all that time are slower in learning language now because they couldn't watch someone's lips moving, and so they're slower in that. Amazingly enough, churches and places of worship were forced to be closed down. There were even churches that met where the pastor preached in the parking lot and the congregants all met in their cars with windows up, and police came and scattered them and said, "You can't be here." The simple act of social distancing became an issue, as everyone guessed what's the right distance to be away from someone else. Literacy rates have declined. All these things are results, not to mention the loss of lives and the health experiences that have been out there for many Americans. So there are legitimate questions. I wanted to be able to raise some of those, to be able to walk through some of this, because it has been very, very challenging. As we've gone through some of your notes and your diary and other things that are out there, we're trying to be able to pull bits and pieces of things to be able to learn lessons. On May the 6th, 2020, you wrote at that time, I had a conversation with Robert Redfield, who, as you know well, was then the director of CDC, about the fact that greater than 1 million children worldwide have missed their measles vaccination because of the shutdown. You stated, this is terrible and needs to be addressed, since on that basis alone, there would be far more excess deaths from measles among children than coronavirus deaths among children. I need to bring this up to the TF, the task force. Did you ever have an opportunity to bring up the potential of measles deaths among children and an infection rate going around the world from measles based on the fact that so many children would not get their measles vaccine because of the shutdown?
I'm sorry, Senator, but on the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
That is your right to do. One of the big issues is really coming up is on the lab issue. This was greatly discussed about whether this came from a lab or whether this came from nature. There are obvious issues and differences between the two to be able to know this. You had a lot of conversation on this. Scientists around the world were in conversation on this. There were different statements that you even made in your private notes and your public notes on it. In January the 26th of 2020, this is before we had our first tragic death of coronavirus in the United States. You wrote, it now appears using epi data that the genomic data, the first infection was in early December and was not connected to the market, which was the big rumor that was out there, is this wet market in China. We know the market was not the source, it was the amplifier. On January the 31st, you wrote about a phone call. You wrote, the people on the phone felt the mutations around the furin cleavage site of the spike protein could not have occurred naturally, since it would require an evolutionary jump that they found nowhere in bat isolates. They bring up the possibility this could have been deliberately inserted and either accidentally released or deliberately released by a crazy person in the lab, the former being the most likely. February the 1st, same year, 2020. This is again still before our first death. There was not total agreement about the likelihood of deliberate insertion. Ron said he was sure that this could occur naturally and we should not waste our time and divert our effort to pursue this. This is expected of him since he was the original gain-of-function person with Yoshi. Also, Christian was withdrawn. The rest felt deliberate insertion was possible, and given the fact that Dr. Jingling Shi at the University of Wuhan has been working for years in gain-of-function in coronaviruses to allow adaptation of the spike protein to bind to the human ACE2 receptor, we could not let this go. That's a remarkable statement for February the 1st of 2020 when there hadn't even been the first death here, but we knew something was moving. You knew well that something was moving. You identified February the 1st, before any of us had ever heard of the Wuhan lab, not only the Wuhan lab in the conversation, but literally the scientist that you named in your own notes, the lead scientist that was there. It's interesting to me on that. And the questions I was going to ask you was just your background and knowledge about the Wuhan lab and Dr. Shi and all the details. I'm aware of where you have been on trying to be able to plead your Fifth Amendment right, which is your right to be able to do. But I also want to be able to find out some facts to be able to help us for the future on this. The Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in May of 2020 put out a classified document that has only been recently unclassified on this, that had this statement: we assess all the necessary conditions for an accidental release of a laboratory-modified coronavirus, specifically a coronavirus adapted to recognize human cell receptors, were present at the Chinese Wuhan Institute of Virology in mid to late 2019. Now, the question that I had for you is, this is May the 27th of 2020. This is the report that most people will see, is this. I have clearance. I serve on the Intelligence Committee. I've actually read this complete document unredacted. My concern is, were you given the ability to see this document unredacted? Based on your position, were you able to see this and to be able to get this information? I could see it, and I know what's here. Everybody else just has their conclusion at the beginning of it, not this. My question to you was going to be, did you have access? Because it's important for the future that people in your position do have access to this kind of information and insight. Is there any way you could answer that question? Were you able to give access to this data?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
You wrote on January the 26th of 2020, we should be allowed to send our CDC epidemiologists to China to work with them so they could see the data firsthand. You also wrote in February 12th, 2020, that you had great concerns about the World Health Organization because it depends greatly on China and, as you stated, often bows to them. Now, this is a really important issue that we've got to resolve for the future. It's not just our cooperation with Chinese scientists, it's our acknowledgement that China covered up their data, wouldn't allow our scientists to be able to come in. They cleaned up the wet market. They cleaned up the other areas. They wouldn't allow you to get access to all the other scientists who are there, including their health records, what happened to them, or even all the sequencing that they had done in advance. For the future of our research and our cooperation with any scientists around the world, I think it's really important that we resolve, if we're going to fund research and cooperate with you, we've got to have certain things from you. If things go sideways, we've got to have access to all information in all places. You were noting not only that China was affecting the World Health Organization and that China was bending them to their will, and so the World Health Organization was putting out data that you saw, at least at that point, as being from a Chinese perspective, covering up what was going on. But you also noted we weren't able to get access to all this information. We've got to be able to figure this out for the future to be able to make sure that research that is done, we have access to all information. If something goes sideways at some point, which clearly it did at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and that being, as was noted by many people, the only lab in the world that was doing research like this that had a lower standard of actually their security standards there than many other labs around the world, yet they were doing this very dangerous research. What can we gain, and what advice could you give us to say in a future setting, we've got to make sure that we actually get information from people and we can be guaranteed that we're going to get that insight? Yes, sir.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
I yield back.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to go back to the dark days of the coronavirus pandemic, one of the darkest days or times in our history. Hospitals were overflowing. Navy medical ships were docked in the Hudson River. Emergency rooms were forced into unprecedented triaging during the worst week of the pandemic, which happens to have been the last week of President Trump's first term. More than 25,000 Americans died of COVID-19. Easy to forget those dark days. But for the past 18 months, the Trump administration has been engaged in a campaign to rewrite this history. And today's proceeding, I fear, is part of that effort, one of the darkest days in our Senate's history. The Trump administration has launched a baseless set of smears against vaccines that help pull us out of that public health crisis, vaccines that are undoubtedly President Trump's greatest accomplishment. It has slashed funding to local public health departments that were on the front lines of the pandemic. And those healthcare workers are heroes. It has disparaged those heroes as woke or wasteful. And it has used a politicized Department of Justice to target the researchers who helped us track and understand the novel virus. Today's hearing is another page in that playbook, sadly, tragically. Dr. Fauci, you've spent 5 decades in public service, including nearly 4 decades in leadership at the National Institutes of Health, helping to conquer COVID-19, but also HIV, swine flu, Zika, Ebola, and other epidemics with real-life results saving human lives. Put aside all the flowery rhetoric that we hear in the United States Senate. Dr. Fauci has saved lives, as have public health officials in the United States and throughout the world. And today, we are demeaning and degrading their life-saving service. Republicans are eager to rebrand you as a villain in order to distract from their own failure to protect Americans from soaring healthcare costs. They've been rising astronomically in the last couple of years, and from unsafe food, which has caused cyclospora to spread, and resurgent measles as a result of the anti-vaccine policy. This hearing is the culmination of a years-long crusade, which started more than 6 years ago when Dr. Fauci dared to contradict President Trump. The campaign to vilify you, Dr. Fauci, is just one part of this larger campaign against science and facts, a campaign that has made Americans less safe. It is shameful that in a country like ours, a dedicated public service like Dr. Fauci has experienced persistent threats to his life since the pandemic because of the lies that are told about him. His attorney has been gagged, thrown out of this hearing room. But he has written a letter to the chairman that is an explanation for the reasons why Dr. Fauci is, in fact, invoking his constitutional right. It is a right. And I would ask that this letter from David Schertler and Danny Onato be made a part of the record if there's no
Without
objection.
objection.
His attorney has also issued a statement within the last half hour, I believe, that sets forth, again, the reasons that he is here to help protect his client's rights. And I would ask that that statement be made part of the record as well, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
Let's be very clear. The Fifth Amendment is a right of everyone appearing before an authority like this one. It should be respected. And the reason that Dr. Fauci has invoked it, in the words of his attorney, quote, During and after the COVID-19 pandemic, Dr. Fauci appeared at least a dozen times for congressional hearings in the Senate alone in answer to questions about the very issues on which you purport to seek information. He has been thoroughly transparent and consistent in providing factual information to Congress, and he is deeply familiar with the processes and protocols of sharing information with the legislative branch. And then referring to the chairman, this years-long public crusade against Dr. Fauci makes one thing clear. This is not a serious effort to seek information from Dr. Fauci in a transcribed interview for a valid legislative purpose. You are single-mindedly fixated on Dr. Fauci, seeing Dr. Fauci prosecuted for imaginary crimes, and you are so invested in that outcome that you have created a personal brand around it. Those are the words of his attorney, and he cites as well the statements of the chairman, which indicate a clear intent that the result of this proceeding be a prosecution. Quote, "The power of some of us must be used for good, like putting Fauci in jail." That's from December 23, 2025. I want to give him a subpoena and a jail cell, also from December of 2025. The first was 2024. Those kinds of statements by the chairman of a committee in tweets certainly provide a well-founded fear that the proceeding underway is simply an effort to trap Dr. Fauci in some kind of criminal wrongdoing. That is not the purpose of a congressional hearing, not the valid purpose of a congressional hearing. During some of the dark days in this body, under Senator Joe McCarthy, it became standard operating procedure to seek that kind of prosecutorial objective. We should not be part of a rerun of that kind of effort. This attempt to rebrand one of the most challenging times in our nation's history is a short-sighted act of desperation that will leave us less prepared for the next pandemic. It is an insult to the memory of more than 1 million Americans who died from COVID-19. If there are valid scientific questions about the origins of this pandemic, COVID-19, about the kinds of steps that were taken to counter it, about the need for more preparation, they should certainly be addressed, but not in a show trial, not as part of a continuing vendetta against a single individual. And unfortunately, I fear that is what we are seeing today. America deserves better. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
In no courtroom in America can you have your witness plead the Fifth Amendment and then your attorney gets to testify. That's what that letter is. The attorney's complaining and testifying, saying, he didn't do it, the prosecution's unfair. You don't get to do that. That's one thing you give up when you take the Fifth Amendment. You say, I'm not going to testify. I'm not going to give you any information. You don't then get to put your lawyer forward to justify it. He can do it in the press, but you can't come and testify. He was not invited to testify, and he was out of order, and it was appropriate to have him ejected. Senator.
Chairman Paul, thank you for doing this. I think I know in my state people have been asking questions about Dr. Fauci for years. So Dr. Fauci, your entry has made clear that you love being a hero, a celebrity, and here having the eyes of the world upon you. You loved every newspaper profile, every photo shoot, every fancy dinner with the elites. To many Americans who lost family members, who lost trust in our federal government, you're not a hero. Unfortunately, you're a villain. You made yourself the story and abandoned the American people to serve your own ego. To begin, I would like to talk about your relationship with David Morenz. He was the senior advisor in the NIAID, Office of the Director, your office, for 16 years. He was your friend. He was a frequent guest at your house. You reportedly co-authored over 50 scientific articles with him. You turned to him first right after COVID-19 first occurred. Earlier this year, the Department of Justice charged him with conspiracy against the United States.